Harvard, Stanford, it's just very hard after only 2 years of experience, 3 years of experience consulting to then get in.
There are a lot of overworked consultants out there who, at the end of the day, need their sleep. And then there are just some who find that extra gear.
Business acumen, being able to see the bigger picture, and the whole reason one of the consulting firms is brought in to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Make sure you think about the second order of your work.
If you look at the class profiles from the top business programs, the biggest pipeline is consulting. Business schools love management consultants, yet with such a big pipeline of applicants comes incredible competition. Today we'll discuss how applicants for management consulting can stand out. To inform the discussion, we're bringing in a former management consultant herself, Liza Weale. Liza, I think you're the perfect guest today because you started when you yourself were a Bain Company consultant, and you actually started doing this stuff by helping associates work through their own admissions process. And like what got you excited about it, and what could you say to one consultant versus another?
Yeah, that's a great question. I loved my time at Bain. I know you and I have spoken about it and how much of a learning experience it was.
Yeah.
But it was when I was starting to take a more manager role, or CTL is the language that they had at the time at Bain. And a lot of the associates on my teams were starting to think about business school.
Right.
I'd been a communications TA at MIT Sloan, another thing we have in common.
Yes.
And I offered to read their essays without much of a thought beyond that.
Right.
But then once I started reading the essays, I just loved helping people tell their story, and really express who they were, and what stories had shaped them.
Right.
And this question of how do you approach different consultants all on the same team, or different associate consultants all on the same team? Kind of, it's all just like, each of them were so different once you got beyond the, we're all working on this case together.
Right.
And I think that is, that's the bottom line, or the moral of the story when it comes to if you're applying from management consulting. It is the most populated pipeline for any school.
Right.
And it's also the sort of sweet spot for these schools. But the trick, if there's any trick, it's really digging into your own personal stories, the things that have shaped you, and when you're at your best, and even maybe when you're at your worst too.
Yeah. In fact, one of our previous podcasts, we were talking about the Harvard Business School application, and it gives you really plenty of real estate, as do other applications, to really maybe share a failure. And again, sometimes as a consultant, at first blush, you don't think, how can I distinguish myself? But at the end of the day, again, human process, I'll have to say that a lot in the human condition includes some failures. So I don't want to get too in the weeds right here.
Right.
But Jeremy, how do you think about helping consultants, particularly when it does take a little bit of effort to actually distinguish one from another?
I mean, this is a trope that I come back to all the time, which is hopefully people are planning well in advance. And so it's tough to show up and say, hey, I've got 3 years at PwC. I'm applying now. I have to take my GMAT and GRE. What should I do in the next 6 months? It's going to be really hard for you to get into top school. There are enough consultants out there who have engaged and planned well in advance. So some of the things you can do is obviously take your test early. Tests are good for 5 years. GRE or GMAT doesn't matter. You can be active in your work environment, not just doing the work you've been given, but we find that those who get into real top schools, generally speaking, like a gap between Harvard and Stanford and others, really those who are creating opportunities, not receiving opportunities.
Right.
And sometimes that's just luck. Like sometimes you see an opportunity that maybe like you couldn't see from a different vantage point. It doesn't need to be like, I just brought in Ford Motor Co. as a company for this firm. It's more like, I saw an opportunity to do some niche training. I saw an opportunity to start this affinity club. I saw an opportunity to be particularly helpful to my MD, whatever it is. So, I think it's listening, it's being active and managing your career. And then this is the hard part for a lot of people, because consultants are still, like, the cliche is true. They're still on the plane. They're still coming and going. But trying to find a way to be active outside of your work. And like the flip side of that is there are now tons of online opportunities to
That's
volunteer,
absolutely true. Absolutely
to engage. You know, you can volunteer with the Smithsonian online. You can volunteer, as a tutor, as a mentor. You can volunteer as a business coach for someone in a different country. There's so many different ways.
That's right.
It's infinite. But just the idea that, hey, on a relative basis, if you've got, I talked about this when we talk about private equity applicants, kind of like incremental turns the dial.
That's right.
There are a lot of overworked consultants out there who, at the end of the day, need their sleep. I would be one of them. I couldn't maintain that lifestyle for a long period of time. And then there are just some who find that extra gear and if you're looking at an admissions office, they're saying among this crew, we kind of need to pick the ones who have that extra gear because we need some way to differentiate a little bit.
I mean, I think that's an important point. Something that is hard for you to do, whether it's actually raising your hand or volunteering, if it's hard for you to do, or it's hard for all consultants to do, that is the point of differentiation, right? If nobody else has time to volunteer, and you actually volunteer, and like Jeremy said, you have a lot of opportunities now to volunteer online, other opportunities, it's that is your point of differentiation.
What I often say to applicants in overrepresented groups, I say, put yourself in the admissions director's seat and say they're evaluating you and they're evaluating me, and your GPA is maybe a nick better and your GMAT's a little bit better. That's not everything, but it gives you a little bit of an advantage. It's we both have really strong recommendations, have done great things at work, but you've shown a little more initiative than I have. Well, now I'm starting to kind of look like you're pulling away. And then it's and I'm tired. I go to sleep, and you're out there and you found a way to be a business coach to Women's Collective in Belize. I don't know where I got that from, but you did. Yeah. Okay, they've got to differentiate in some way. That those little things are enough to say, hey, Jeremy's not our guy. You're our applicant.
Right. I'd also say that the consulting firms, there are so many opportunities to get involved. I think the consulting firms just really recognize, my hypothesis is, they recognize that there's a lot of great talent in the firm. Yep. And so, at Bain, we called them extra tens. It was the different committees you'd get involved in, whether it was training. I know when I was there, I helped, I shepherded or spearheaded the move from one office to another. There are so many opportunities to get involved within your office that are basically, you have them at your fingertips. Yeah. So that doesn't mean you have to go chase them all down. Right. It is more, if you don't have those on your resume, it's going to look a little conspicuous. Right. Why have you not engaged in some way when that's actually relatively easy to do? If you're not even doing the easy, low-hanging fruit way to get involved, that's going to be a miss on your application, or you're going to be more at risk.
Do you want to learn more about your target business schools? Check out On Track by mbaMission, where we have in-depth modules on all the top business schools, covering everything from what makes them unique to how to tackle the application essays and short answers, and so much more. You can also practice for interview and video questions, all done on your schedule, on demand. We appreciate your dedication to our podcast, and we want to offer you 30% off any On-Track subscription. Use the code MBAMPOD to get 30% off any On-Track subscription. Check it out at ontrack.mbamission.com.
It does filter to a very important piece of your application, which is the recommendation. Again, a VP or a case manager, whatever it is, at one of these top consulting firms is going to be asked to do a lot of recommendations a year. And if they're considering, applicant A or associate A versus associate B, and they themselves are trying to think about how can I differentiate between these two people, they themselves are going to start thinking, okay, when I write this recommendation, I really have to highlight that this person has taken on our charity day or whatever it might be.
Yeah. That's a great framing to share with people when they're thinking about it. Is my recommender going to be able to differentiate me versus the other associates that are asking for a recommendation? I think that's smart.
Yep.
But what about the role of firm? There's people leave business school. I want to go to MBB, and I mean, it's hard to quantify, but there is a little bit of a hierarchy among consulting firms. Right. It was fair to say it's easier to get in from an MBB compared to, say, Accenture, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte.
Right. But it also depends on what you've done at those firms.
Yeah.
God knows, Liza and I saw at Bain Company, certainly the associates who always stay behind the desk, that the bottom line is they were analysts. They were very good at that, what I would say, a important but not necessarily the ultimate most important piece. And then there were certainly associates who I had an associate, maybe the smartest person I ever worked with, associate for me. At some point, the CEO started calling him, meaning that he jumped over the director, the VP, me for good reasons. I eventually called the associate. You can see how immediately that person is different. And that type of, I would say, true leadership, whether it's intellectual leadership, if you do that at Accenture versus or whoever, Deloitte, whoever it is, versus sort of, again, being behind the desk at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, business schools are really going to love you.
Yeah. Said differently, there's no substitute for being an impact player and for taking that initiative we're talking about. So there are definitely going to be students at top schools that have gone to Accenture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the numbers are there. Yeah, the numbers are there. Look at the employment report. You're going to see a lot of consultants there, and they're not just mbaB consultants. They're from all over the place.
And they're not just the big consulting firms. Sometimes you see the niche players that
or somebody's got like a little bit of a niche focus. Like it's you're an operations consultant, a retail consultant, as opposed to like a
ZS
broad
Associates
strategy.
or with Cantor.
Healthcare, healthcare. So you're in a healthcare niche, or there are all sorts of niches where you can kind of say, like, I've got some expertise where I can add to the class.
Right, and that's the thing is they're building classes. Business schools are building classes, and they do need different voices there. So at the end of the day, coming from a different firm is certainly a different voice, and they certainly want you there. And part of it also is a numbers game in the sense of the reason there's so many mbaB consultants at these schools is because a ton of mbaB consultants end up applying. And again, there's always going to be some, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be you. I mean, I think that's one of the issues. So let's circle back in terms of getting back to Liza. Okay, you see this now every day. Two consultants, they sort of look sort of the same. They are now at that point where they start writing their essays, thinking about the things. How does one even approach that?
Well, I think it's something that we've all spoken a lot about. It's about investing and reflecting and really knowing yourself. It's going to be my mantra. I'll say these things all the time, but there's just such a temptation to look at the person next to you and think about, oh, but I did this, I did that, but I was placed on, I had 6 projects, that person only had 1. Right. That person's saying the same thing, but just saying different things. I worked on 1 project for 2 years and that person's been on 6 different ones. Forget that noise. Really start digging into those challenge moments. It's all about the challenge moments where you were really pushed to the max in whatever way it might be. And then it's also thinking about all those influences, your upbringing, your choices in college that have really, made you who you are. But again, this part of the process, it's looking inward. It's forgetting about everybody else is critical.
If you spend your whole time measuring yourself against like the perceived strengths of others with no awareness of what's actually going on in their application, like under the hood, you're going to have a really tough application.
Yeah, listen,
100%.
I say to my clients all the time, if you're comparing yourself to the person, cubicle over, down the street, whatever it is, you lose.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're going to lose.
And I'll get calls from people who like, hey, I applied this cycle without your firm, but I was wondering if I could talk about my application because the guy beside me got in.
Yes.
And I'm better than him.
All the time.
It's like you don't know what is going on in that person's in that person's application. You don't know what you might know them well, but you don't know everything about them. You don't know what they wrote. You don't know what the recommender wrote. You might not know what their family background is. There's so much you don't know.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, he had about the same GMAT as me, and we went to the same kind of school. We had about the same GPA.
Right.
It doesn't matter. You can't. You're a human being. There is no apples to apples comparison for you as a human being.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And we really, again, want to emphasize the importance of introspection. This idea of really thinking about who you are, what you've done, why you are now where you are, and then as an extension, why you want to do what you want to do.
Yeah. And I also think, and I'll come back to that, we should come back to that idea of why you want to do what you want to do. But I also think sometimes, this is a little bit playing into stereotypes, but, there's the assumption that when you're in management consulting, you'll come in, you'll solve a problem, but you'll leave long before implementation. And it's a little bit of sometimes that of beef or even why people want to leave management consulting. But I think what that means for when you are an applicant, invest in thinking beyond, okay, here's what the project did, but really see it through. Where were the results? How is this implemented? If you don't know, at least understand the bigger picture. I feel like sometimes consultants, when they're applying, they're very focused on the tasks that they did.
I think that's right.
Like, I did this market analysis.
Right.
I'm like, well, what did the market analysis show?
Right.
Oh, that's a different question. That's a harder question.
Right.
But that is actually more getting at your business acumen, being able to see the bigger picture, and the whole reason one of the consulting firms is brought in to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And that's just something that I'm always reminding clients, make sure you think about the second order of your work.
And also, like, it's not always about the analysis. Like an applicant that you sent me many years ago, I remember just wrote about like how morale was tough on his team and how he was in like a dimly lit room at the top of some small office tower in Charlotte, if I recall, like late at night on a Friday, and how no one wanted to be there, and how it was he played a role in keeping people's morale up and keeping his own morale up.
Yeah.
That it wasn't all glamour, and then it wasn't all like I gave the CEO some an action plan and he just implemented everything worked or something. It's like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And he just talked about kind of like other parts of his role that really were formative for him that I think were. I just think he humanized himself. He was because that's kind of what we're saying. You can't be one of this. If you are, a part of this indistinguishable ocean of applicants, you're not going to succeed.
That's right.
So he did it through non-core consulting skills, which was great for him.
And can I ask, was that his idea or your idea? And I'm curious, because I suspect it was you that helped him see the power of that story. And I'm not. It's hard when you're in it.
That's right.
To think that was anything.
Yeah, he was a wonderfully creative guy. We maintain a friendship to this day. I'm going to give him the credit.
Really?
I'm going to say that because it was the intro, generally speaking, to Finding Purpose and a What Matters More essay. And so he sort of launched it by talking about kind of how he felt like a little bit of how he might be wasting some of his time, how the deliverable didn't matter that much. He was finding himself. I think he sort of felt like everyone had an ennui about being there, and he wanted to be in environments that were more motivating to him, and so he left consulting behind. Right. So it was part of his life story.
Right. Most clients can't get to that point.
Right.
I hate to, but particularly folks who are really busy, introspection works. It just takes time. It takes something. You need someone to really help you with it. And again, I don't want to do a commercial here, but this I think is a huge value add on our part, which is really start pulling these stories out. And I know, Liza, you will listen to people, and you yourself, I think, have used this analogy to putting a puzzle together or something.
Yes. So putting a puzzle together, yes. And it's also, consultants know what they're being evaluated at.
That's right.
When they're at work.
Right.
They know what they're going to get their review on, and they know what matters, and what matters is value add to the client. Right. So I think it is, yes, people haven't necessarily invested a lot in introspection, but it's a different measuring stick.
That's
They're
right.
not, business schools aren't assessing the same thing that an associate consultant will be evaluated on at work.
Right.
So it's harder for that person to maybe find the beauty in some of the stories of when they've really been at their best, because that is not necessarily what they're rewarded for at work. So going back to your point about really building this puzzle, it's thinking about all the different components of when someone's at their best or when they're most challenged and starting to dig into those.
Right. And I'll also interject here, and we talk about it a lot. Where else in the application could that information come through? Listen, if you're a top bucket consultant, your recommender will talk about it. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to imply it. If you've been on a lot of projects, then maybe your resume shows that. Or if you've been on a really sexy project, maybe your resume shows that. So what can you show that won't appear in other pieces of your application?
And that's all thinking about your motivations, your values, why you get inside it. The other thing I always say is we want to get inside your head. We want to see why you made the choices that you did. It's all the color and the character that's going to be much harder to see in those more soundbitey resume or online application. The resume or the recommendation can go there, but certainly the applicant has a little bit more opportunity to explore the characters, the characteristics that makes one in their essays, for sure.
One thing I want to talk about is we find this with private equity applicants, another very well-represented group, where we find that male private equity applicants, generally speaking, succeed if they're applying after their second year into their third year.
That's right.
So they've done 2 years of banking or consulting, sometimes 2 years of private equity, and then they're applying to business school. I have found, I think this is fair to say, that applicants who are applying with 2 years of consulting, extremely long odds. Applicants who are finishing a third year of consulting, still pretty tough. Like I find most of them are moving on to another role, and then applying. Like 4 or 5 years into their careers. I can see both of you saying that's right, but I think it's important for us to get that out there for applicants who are like, I can find a couple of small tweaks to differentiate myself. Boom, I'm in at Harvard. It's just not the case.
Yeah, I feel like Harvard, Stanford, it's just very hard after only 2 years of experience, 3 years of experience consulting to then get in. It is just very hard. So what I frequently tell folks is many consulting firms offer you a fourth year seconded to some of your clients, for example. That's very interesting, probably worth thinking about.
And it's worth it just for the
life
experience.
Yeah.
If I were there, I would have easily taken this comment. It's just another skill set. And I think sometimes when people are coming into business school with one experience, an advisory experience, no less. So they're not necessarily up against that sort of operational day-to-day putting out fires experience of working, within industry. I think the complement of real operational experience plus the advisory makes you a much stellar applicant, and you will be a better leader in the long run as a result, even if you want to go back into consulting. That's just my personal bias on the value of such an experience. So I think this, clearly the consulting firms feel that way as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't make this
this offer.
Exactly. So it seems like a bit of a no-brainer. It happens to benefit one's school application or one's business school application, but it's also very, very good for one's own professional development.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Certainly one dilemma that we see when this really plays itself out is, in fact, someone applies after second year, really only sometimes even after their first year in consulting, they apply. But as we've heard before, sure, you apply, you get rejected, but that's not a death sentence by any means.
Right.
I think we keep on coming to the fact that, reapplicants are actually looked at, fairly favorably. It's somewhat school dependent, but I would say marginally favorably at most schools.
I mean, the school. What's your job as an admissions officer? Is your job to punish someone for applying in the past, or is your job to find, if you're awarding the best ballpark 900 people out there, you're not going to look at someone and say, well, this young woman is absolutely amazing and she's grown a lot in the last year, and we'd love to have her part. She meets all the standards of being an exciting member of our class. She applied last year. Forget her.
Yeah,
it's just not like that's not a self-interested process.
Right.
And so I think, look, the admissions committees know there are a lot of consultants out there applying, and they know they can't accept all of them. And applicants, it's hard to understand because a rejection feels so personal.
Yes, it
does. They need to keep in mind that, like, you might have been, if they could have accepted double the class, like you might have been at the standard they're looking for, but they just had to make some somewhat arbitrary choices. So, like, it's not a repudiation of you, and that you can go forward and reapply. And as you said, like, I remember Rod Garcia, the former director of admissions at MIT Sloan, saying to me, he said, a rejection isn't a life sentence, right?
Yeah.
And we actually had a consultant, a client a couple of years ago who applied, not like Jack Ma, who applied to Harvard Business School apparently 10 times, but applied to MIT 3 times and got in on his third time. It's not common. Maybe the world is telling you something. If you keep going, it's not working. But, like, reapplying, totally fine, especially if you're from
especially if you're young.
Just keep growing. Like, you got to keep growing in your career. Like, I often say to applicants who are higher risk, like, really, really high risk or really overrepresented, I'm like, look, I'm not saying you're not going to get in. I'm saying I think there's a risk that you're a significant risk you're not going to get in. So apply, like, continue to develop your profile as if you're applying next year.
Always. Always think about the long game, right? If you're just thinking about this fall, you're going to miss opportunities, even for a wait list. That's what I always say is, like,
that's right.
When you talk to someone maybe in the spring and they don't have a lot of community involvement and they say, but if I get started now, will that look disingenuous? Well, that doesn't really count for much. And I say, well, any action is, any action, if you're interested in it, it's good action, but also think about the long game. There's a very good chance if you're in consulting, you might end up in that further consideration bucket of HBS or a wait list of any of these schools because they know that they can see all the consultants that they want.
That's true.
So you need to invest now to make sure, to shore up the chances you've got something to say when you give them an update later on. And to your question, or the topic on reapplicants, I think, Jeremy, you touched on this a little bit. What is important is to be able to show the delta between who you were when you last applied and who you are now. If it's just more of the same, if you're going to bat with the exact same approach as you did last year, you probably will come up short again.
Right.
But if you have used this time to say, all right, I didn't quite cross the bar last time. Yeah. What do I have to do to make myself stronger? What sort of projects do I need to get on? What sort of community engagement do I need to tee up for myself? It's going to force me some internal growth.
Absolutely.
And then I'm going to be able to show the schools something new.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, it is not that uncommon that consultants get waitlisted, or particularly if they apply round one and business schools are waiting to see who's coming in round two. Yeah. So the reality is people have to be prepared for, like you said, Liza, the long game. This is actually a process that you think is a 3-month process. Could be a 12-month process, and you have to be ready for that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hey, Harold, maybe that's a great place to wrap this up. You got to play the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to play the long game. And on that note, Liza, thank you very much for joining us today. Jeremy, thank you very much for joining us today.
It is our pleasure to have Liza here today. We're so lucky that you came all this way.
I want to come back
with us in Boston.
I want to come back all the time. This has been so much fun. It's so great catching up with all of you.
We're definitely going to do this again.
Count me in. I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
If you want to be one of our success stories, sign up for a free consultation with a member of our full-time MBA admissions team. Since we've worked with tens of thousands of applicants over the past 2 decades, we can give you our honest opinion on your chances and help you put together your very best application. That is not a sales call, but rather your first session with one of us for free. We can give you a profile evaluation, answer specific questions about the process, review your resume, talk about your school choices, and so much more. Sign up at mbaMission.com/consult. We look forward to working with you.